Keanu Reeves never spoke much about his birthday. He had spent years in the spotlight, yet when that day arrived each year, he often kept it simple. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, no loud celebrations. This year was no different. He walked quietly through the streets of Los Angeles in the morning, his hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his face. People recognized him now and then, nodding politely, some whispering, but most gave him space. He liked it that way. By noon, he had returned to his small apartment. It wasn't the kind of home one might expect a Hollywood star to live in. It was quiet, filled with books, old records, and a few gifts he had never unwrapped. He sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city move without him. The sound of traffic hummed below, but inside his apartment, the silence was heavy. He glanced at his phone once. No messages, no missed calls. It wasn't that people had forgotten. He had chosen not to tell anyone. He didn't want parties. He didn't want noise. Yet there was a small ache inside him. Birthdays have a way of reminding us that we are human, that no matter how far we've come, a simple knock on the door or a voice saying, "Happy birthday," can mean more than fame or fortune. As the sun lowered in the sky, shadows stretched across his floor. He sat on the couch with a half-finished book in his hands, but his eyes weren't on the page. They were on the memories he carried. His childhood, his losses, the friends who had come and gone, the ones who had stayed only in spirit. For a moment, he wondered if this loneliness was a kind of test. Maybe the universe wanted him to keep proving his resilience. Maybe silence was his gift, a reminder that he could endure, that kindness wasn't about what he received but what he continued to give. Still, when the evening settled in, the weight grew heavier. He lit a single candle on the small cake he had bought earlier in the day. It wasn't decorated, just a plain cake with white frosting. He didn't even make a wish when he blew the candle out. He whispered softly, "Another year," and let the smoke rise into the still air. Then, just as he placed the plate aside and leaned back in his chair, a sound broke the silence. 3 soft knocks at the door. He froze. It was unusual. No one came unannounced. His neighbors respected his privacy. His friends, when they wanted to see him, always sent a message first. His heart beat a little faster. He rose slowly, every step careful, almost cautious. The knocking came again, gentle, not rushed, as if whoever stood outside wasn't in a hurry. He reached the door, placed his hand on the knob, and for a moment he hesitated. Something inside him whispered, "This is the moment that will change everything." With a slow breath, he turned the handle and opened the door. What he saw standing there made his breath catch. The night had been silent until that moment. Now the story of his birthday was no longer just about loneliness. It was about the unexpected, about the knock that would begin something he could never have imagined. When Keanu opened the door, he expected maybe a neighbor asking for help, or perhaps a delivery left at the wrong address. What he found instead was a woman standing in the hallway. She looked nervous, holding a small paper bag in her hands. Her eyes were kind, though her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "Are you Keanu Reeves?" He gave a gentle smile, the kind he often used to make strangers feel at ease. "Yes, I am," he replied. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated, clutching the bag closer to her chest. She seemed unsure if she should continue. Keanu noticed her hands shaking slightly, and without thinking, he stepped aside and said, "Would you like to come in?" Her eyes widened at the invitation. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse, but then she nodded, almost shyly, and stepped inside. Keanu closed the door behind her. The apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of a record playing softly in the background. She looked around, taking in the simplicity of the space. No signs of Hollywood excess, no glittering trophies on display, just books, music, and a calm silence that felt almost heavy. She finally placed the paper bag on the table. I didn't know if this was a mistake, she said. But I found something that belongs to you. Keanu tilted his head, curious. To me? She nodded. I work at a small bookstore near the corner of 5th. A few days ago, someone left this envelope on the counter. No name, no return address. Just one word written on it. Keanu. She pulled the envelope from the bag and handed it to him. His hands, steady but thoughtful, took it carefully. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed slightly. The handwriting on the front was delicate, almost fragile, as if it belonged to another time. His eyes narrowed with focus. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. He looked up at her. And you brought this here to me? She nodded again. I wasn't sure if it was real, but something told me it mattered. I thought maybe it was important. Keanu ran his thumb over the edges of the envelope. Something inside him stirred, like a memory reaching from far away. He hadn't even opened it, yet the weight of it felt heavy in his hand. Silence stretched between them until the woman finally asked, Do you want me to leave you alone to read it? Keanu shook his head gently. No. Please stay. He tore the envelope open slowly, carefully, as if afraid the paper might crumble. Inside was a folded letter. He opened it, and his eyes began moving across the page. The handwriting was unmistakable. Even after all these years, he knew it. It was from someone he had lost long ago. His chest tightened. The words blurred for a moment before he steadied himself and kept reading. The woman sat quietly, watching him, sensing the storm of emotions inside him, though he said nothing. Finally, he lowered the letter to his lap. His voice, when it came, was low, almost broken. This is from an old friend, someone I thought the world had forgotten. He looked at the woman, his eyes filled with something between pain and gratitude. Thank you for bringing this to me. You have no idea how much this means. She gave a small, uncertain smile. Sometimes things find their way to where they're meant to be. Keanu nodded, his mind still lost in the words of the letter. But somewhere deep inside, a thought began to grow. This knock, this stranger, this letter, it was not chance. It was something more. And he knew in his heart that this night was only beginning. Keanu sat in silence, the letter trembling in his hands. The woman across from him didn't speak, but her eyes held quiet patience, as though she understood that whatever he was holding carried more weight than simple paper and ink. He looked down again, forcing himself to reread the opening line. Dear Keanu, if you are reading this, then I was right. You would still be here, living with the same quiet strength you always carried. I am sorry for leaving so suddenly. I am sorry for the silence. His throat tightened. The handwriting belonged to a friend from his youth, a soul he once leaned on during the hardest moments of his early life. This friend had been there before the fame, before the movies, before the cameras. And then, one day, they vanished, without goodbye, without reason. The words on the page continued. I wanted to reach you, but I didn't know how. So I left this letter, hoping one day it might find its way to you. There is something I never said, and now I must. Keanu stopped reading. His fingers pressed hard against the edge of the paper, his eyes glistening though no tears fell. The woman leaned forward gently. Are you all right? He let out a long, shaky breath. This person, they disappeared from my life decades ago. I never knew why. I thought they had forgotten me. She nodded softly. And now? He looked back at the letter. Now I realize they didn't forget. They just carried something too heavy to share. The air in the room felt different, heavier, yet alive. He turned the page and kept reading. Keanu, you always gave without asking for anything in return. You carried others' pain like it was your own. I wanted to tell you that it mattered. You mattered. The world may see you as an actor, a star, but I saw you as the friend who sat with me in silence when silence was all I could bear. I never said thank you. So, thank you. Thank you for being there, even when no one else was. He stopped again, lowering the letter, his eyes closing for a moment. The woman beside him whispered, "It sounds like you were their anchor." Keanu gave a faint smile, though it was touched with sadness. I never thought of myself that way. I just tried to be there. She looked at him with quiet admiration. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted the letter again, searching for what came next. If you ever wonder why I vanished, know this. I was afraid. Not of you, but of myself. I carried shame I didn't want you to see. I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you from my darkness, but I regret that choice every day. His heart ached. So many years had passed, and yet the words felt alive, as though the friend had just spoken them that very moment. If this letter ever reaches you, then please know you were never forgotten. And maybe, if fate allows, you will find me again. The final line was simple, but it carried a weight he couldn't explain. Happy birthday, my friend. Keanu lowered the letter slowly, his breath unsteady. He whispered, "This was written for today." The woman's eyes widened. "Today?" He nodded. "Today is my birthday. And somehow, this letter arrived now, after all these years." A silence filled the room, deep and almost sacred. For the first time that day, Keanu felt something stir inside him that wasn't loneliness. It was connection. It was the reminder that even across years, across silence, kindness, and memory, could find their way back. The woman stood slowly, as though sensing the moment needed space. "I should go," she said softly. "You probably need time." But Keanu shook his head gently. "Please, stay. This doesn't feel like something I should carry alone." Her eyes softened, and she sat back down. Neither of them spoke for a while. The letter rested between them on the table, fragile but powerful, a bridge between past and present. And as the night deepened, Keanu realized the knock at the door had not just brought a letter. It had brought a witness, someone to share the weight of rediscovered memory. He looked at her quietly and asked, "What's your name?" She smiled faintly. "Elena." The name lingered in the air. Elena. It felt gentle, almost like it belonged in the story that was now unfolding. Keanu looked at her with gratitude, realizing she had unknowingly carried more than just an envelope to his door. She had carried a piece of his past back into his present. They sat together in silence for a while, the letter lying between them on the table. Keanu finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "This friend, they were like family to me once. I never understood why they left, and now I know they carried something too heavy. But if they are still out there..." Elena tilted her head. "Do you want to find them?" He hesitated. The question echoed in his mind. Part of him feared what searching might uncover. More pain, more loss. Yet another part of him whispered that maybe this was the moment to face the unanswered questions that had followed him for years. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers brushing against the edge of the letter. "I don't even know where to begin. This was written so long ago, but the fact that it showed up today, maybe it's a sign." Elena looked thoughtful. "Sometimes signs come when we're ready, not when we want them." He gave her a faint smile. And maybe you showing up here was part of that sign, too. She lowered her eyes for a moment, almost shy, before meeting his gaze again. I only brought it because I felt it mattered. I didn't expect to stay. But I'm glad I did. The words hung between them, honest and unforced. Keanu stood and walked to the window, staring at the city lights stretching into the distance. I've always told myself that some doors are better left closed, but tonight I don't feel that way. Tonight I think I need to open this one. Elena joined him at the window, her voice soft. Then let's open it together. He turned to her slowly. Together? She nodded. You don't have to search alone. Whoever left this letter wanted you to know you were never forgotten. If we try to find them, it's not just about answers. It's about giving both of you a chance to heal. Her words struck something deep within him. For so long, Keanu had carried pain quietly, never wanting to burden others. Now, here was someone offering to share that weight without asking for anything in return. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. All right, we'll search, but we'll have to be careful. I don't even know if they're alive, or where to start looking. Elena smiled gently. Every search begins with one step. They sat back at the table, the letter once again in Keanu's hands. He studied the handwriting, the words, the faint ink marks that hinted at age. There might be clues here. Places mentioned, names, anything that connects to now. Elena leaned closer, pointing to the last line. Look, they wrote, if fate allows, you will find me again. That doesn't sound final. It sounds like they wanted to be found. Keanu nodded slowly. Then maybe fate isn't finished yet. The night grew darker, but inside the small apartment, something new was stirring. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was purpose. For years, Keanu had spent his birthdays quietly, letting the day pass like any other. But this year was different. This year, a knock had given him a letter, a stranger, and a choice. And now, as he placed the letter carefully back on the table, he whispered with quiet resolve, We're going to find them. Elena's eyes met his, steady and calm. Then tomorrow we begin. The morning light crept softly into Keanu's apartment, falling across the letter still resting on the table. Keanu hadn't slept much. He had sat for hours reading the words again and again, each time feeling the weight of them settle deeper into his heart. When Elena returned that morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a notebook, Keanu felt something unusual. He wasn't facing the day alone. Thought we might need this, she said with a small smile, setting the cups down. She opened the notebook and clicked her pen. All right, where do we start? Keanu studied her for a moment. Most people would have walked away after last night, but she hadn't. She had come back. The letter doesn't give much, he said, picking it up again. No address, no city, no clear clues. But the handwriting? I'd recognize it anywhere. It belonged to Daniel. Elena wrote the name carefully. Who was Daniel? Keanu leaned back, his eyes far away. A friend from when I was young. We met before everything, before Hollywood. He was one of the first people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. But he disappeared. No calls, no letters, nothing. One day he was just gone. Elena looked thoughtful. Did you ever try to find him? I did, at first, but life got louder, and I told myself maybe he didn't want to be found. It hurt, but I respected it. Until now. They spread the letter on the table, looking for anything that might lead them forward. Elena tapped her pen against a phrase. If fate allows, you will find me again. Maybe he left more than just words, she said. Sometimes people hide clues in what they write. Keanu frowned slightly, reading the sentence again. Then he noticed something he hadn't before. The ink on that line was darker, fresher somehow, as though it had been written at a different time. "Look here," he said, pointing. "This line looks newer than the rest." Elena leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "You're right. Maybe he added it later, just before leaving the letter behind." They both sat quietly, the weight of possibility heavy between them. Keanu's voice was steady but low. "That means he might still be alive." Elena nodded slowly. "And maybe he wanted you to notice." They spent the morning searching. Elena pulled up records on her phone, typing in Daniel alongside details Keanu provided. Childhood neighborhoods, schools, old haunts where they had once spent their time, but each search brought little. Too many names, too many dead ends. After hours of trying, Elena closed the notebook and sighed. This could take a long time. Keanu gave her a small smile, quiet, but grateful. "I've lived with this silence for decades. A little more time won't hurt." Just as the day seemed to drift into uncertainty, Elena's phone buzzed. She frowned, then turned the screen toward Keanu. "Look, there's a mention of a Daniel Reeves Foundation. It's small, almost hidden. Something about helping kids in Toronto." Keanu's breath caught. "Toronto. That's where we grew up." He leaned closer, reading the article headline. It was brief, almost forgotten by the wider world. "Local foundation continues anonymous donations for underprivileged youth. No photos, no names, just the word Daniel, tied to quiet acts of kindness." Keanu's hands tightened around the edge of the table. "This could be him. It sounds like something he would do." Elena's eyes lit with determination. "Then that's where we go." For a moment, Keanu simply stared at her. The idea of searching after all these years felt overwhelming, but Elena's presence steadied him. He nodded slowly. "Toronto, then." The evening settled around them as they made plans. Flights, places to look, people to ask. The weight of the unknown hung heavy, but beneath it was something Keanu hadn't felt in years: anticipation. As he folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope, he whispered to himself, "Daniel, if you're still out there, we're coming." Elena caught the words, her voice calm but strong. "And this time, you won't be searching alone." The cold air of Toronto carried memories Keanu hadn't touched in decades. The streets, the buildings, even the winter light seemed to whisper pieces of his past. He and Elena walked quietly, their breath visible in the air, the letter tucked safely in his coat pocket. Their search began with the small foundation they had read about. The building was simple, tucked between two old shops, its sign barely visible. Daniel Reeves Foundation. Inside, children's laughter echoed through narrow halls. Drawings were pinned to the walls, and volunteers moved with quiet purpose. Keanu paused at the doorway, his heart heavy. "This feels like him," he whispered. A young volunteer approached, smiling politely. "Can I help you?" Elena glanced at Keanu, then back at the volunteer. "We're looking for Daniel. Daniel Reeves. Is he here?" The volunteer's expression softened. "He doesn't usually meet visitors, but wait here." Minutes felt like hours. Keanu's chest tightened with every passing second. Then, at the far end of the hall, a figure appeared. Older now, with silver streaking his hair, but the eyes were the same. Keanu's breath caught. "Daniel." Daniel stopped in his tracks, disbelief written across his face. For a long moment, neither moved. The years between them felt like a wall, yet also like nothing at all. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice breaking. "Keanu, is it really you?" Keanu nodded, his throat too tight for words. And then, without hesitation, they crossed the space between them and embraced. The hug was strong, desperate, carrying decades of silence, regret, and unspoken love. When they finally pulled back, Daniel's eyes glistened. "I never thought this day would come." Keanu held his gaze. "Why did you disappear?" Daniel lowered his head. "I was drowning, Keanu. Life, it was too heavy. I didn't want you to see me that way. I thought leaving would protect you. But every day I regretted it. I left that letter because I hoped fate might bring us back together." Keanu took a slow breath, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't have to carry it alone. I would have stood with you." Daniel's lips trembled. "I know that now. I just hope it's not too late." Keanu shook his head. "It's never too late." Elena, standing quietly nearby, smiled softly as she watched. She had delivered a letter, but what she had really delivered was a second chance. The three of them sat together for hours in the quiet office. Daniel shared his years of work with the foundation, the children he helped, the life he built in silence. Keanu listened, every word reminding him of the friend he once knew. When the time came to leave, Keanu stood at the doorway, looking back at Daniel. "I came here searching for answers. What I found was more than that. I found my friend again." Daniel's smile was weak but real, and I found the courage to stop hiding. Outside, as snow began to fall, Elena turned to Keanu. "You found him. How do you feel?" Keanu looked up at the sky, the flakes melting against his skin. "Like this was the gift I never expected. All those birthdays alone and this one, it gave me everything." Elena nodded softly. "Sometimes the universe waits until the right moment to bring people back together." Keanu smiled gently, his voice quiet but full of truth. "And sometimes it takes a knock at the door." They walked into the night, not as strangers, but as people bound by kindness, memory, and the reminder that even in silence, love and friendship endure.